Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is a beautiful day in November. And because it's a beautiful day in November, we are going to have a lot of outside noises come through. I've tried to find areas in my yard so that we can talk where it's a little quieter, but I haven't found any. So I'm sorry about the outside noises. We'll just deal with them the best we can. But today is a day for my yard cleanup. Now it's the second week in November. We've had some really hard frosts. They've killed back a lot of the vegetation. Some of it still has a little bit of life left to it, but today is the day that we're going to clean it all up. Now I'm going to talk in my next video why I clean up when I do and take you along with the cleanup. But before I do that video, I decided to do a separate video. If you clean up in the fall, are you harming the insect life? Because it seems like the topic of cleaning up your landscape in fall tends to be really polarizing, and there are a lot of people who really feel they have all the answers. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of my background so you can know exactly where I'm coming from and why I have the opinions that I do, and talk to you a little bit about valuing other people's point of view. I spent the first half of my landscape career as very highly into the organic world. I used to think that pesticides, herbicides, anything with a "side" at the end of the name of it was bad and horrible and was going to destroy the earth around us. Then I went to college in my early 40s. I'm in my late 50s right now. I am getting a little older. But in my early 40s, I went to college and got a bachelor's in landscape management from a university that really focuses in on science. And my views shifted a little bit. I still hold on to my organic practices that I've learned, but I've also learned how soil works and the science behind it. So now I'm firmly in the middle when it comes to landscape practices between the organic and the conventional side. And just so you understand how I view other people's opinions, when I went through my divorce, I had an attorney that was really, really helpful to me. And he said two things to me that changed my life. Number one, he said there's always two sides to every story, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And the other thing that he said was the best divorces are where nobody's happy because nobody got everything that they wanted. That means that I got some things that I wanted, and my ex-husband got some things that he wanted. He said those are the best divorces, and that's the way that I view life. He said everybody has their own opinions, their morals, their beliefs based on their own life experiences. My life experience is different than yours. If I've lived in a different area of the country than you have, then my life experiences are going to be different. And my life experiences and my morals and beliefs are no more important than yours. They're just different. Now there is right and wrong, and we as a society tend to agree mostly on what is really truly right and wrong, and then everything else needs to be given grace. So that's how I look at landscaping. There are right and wrong ways to do landscaping, but most of landscaping comes down to personal preference, and that includes fall cleanup. So sorry about the long lead into this, but I wanted to talk to you about what is important in my landscape to me. Number one, what is important is ease. I am the only one who cleans up my landscape. I'm the only one who does my landscape, and it has to be easy. Plus, it has to be clean and neat. Things that are messy, things that are jumbled, it just gives me anxiety. Now, beneficial insects are really important to me. When I first moved onto this property, it was all grass. Very little other plants were actually planted here. And it took about 3 or 4 years before I even saw honeybees. There were very few pollinators. But I have very, very carefully and very specifically planted to increase the beneficial insects and beneficial pollinators by studying and learning what plants they're attracted to and planting those. And I will show you some clips of the different beneficial insects that I have seen in my yard. Their numbers have actually increased, even though I've always cleaned up my property in the fall. Like I said, I do try to leave some areas and some habitat for them to winter over, but not enough that it makes my yard messy and stressful to me. I think the most important thing is when you're planting during the year to think about those beneficial insects and plant to attract them, and they'll find a way to survive. And because I have an increase in beneficial insects, I actually seem to have a decrease in bad pests. The beneficial insects eat the bad pests. For example, when I discover aphids on my trees or plants, I just leave them because I know that in a few weeks' time they're going to disappear because the beneficial insects will find them and take care of them for me. So beneficial insects, despite the fact that I clean up my property in the fall, are a very important part of my landscape. Let's walk through the landscape right now, show you what it looks like right now, and then in the next video we'll show you what it looks like after the cleanup, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what is anxiety causing to me. So as I said, this is mid-November. We've had some hard frosts and things are starting to die back. We've got some overgrowth going on here, some dead, some crowding. And all of this is going to eventually need to be cleaned up. Now, some of you are like, why? It doesn't get cleaned up in nature. But for me, it needs to get cleaned up because of the way I feel about it. Now, I like the way it looks when it's clean and neat. This is gorgeous. But as I look at this, I think about next spring when everything has been flattened by the snows and the rains and frozen to the ground and has kind of degraded a bit, and how hard it's going to be to clean it up in the spring, especially when in the spring I have other projects that are going to need to be done. I'm going to need to mulch, I'm going to need to look at the irrigation, fix anything that broke over the winter. There's a lot of things that are going to need to be done in the spring that I don't want to have to clean up all of this mess before I do it in the spring. So I'm going to do it in the fall. So besides ease and the way the property looks and the stress that it brings me, or the peacefulness that it brings me, the other thing that is important to me is being environmentally responsible. Now, I do know that there are insects that overwinter in our gardens, and that it's important to leave habitats for them. It's important to plant for them. So let's walk you around my garden a little bit and talk to you about how I can be environmentally responsible, leave spaces for the good beneficial insects, and yet still have a clean property that brings me peace and joy. So now, as I said, the next video is going to take you through the actual property cleanup. But let's look at what is here and what will probably be left and what will probably be cleaned up. There are plants like the sedum that is lying flat on the ground. They have the hollow stems that people talk about being important for little insects. But as you notice, there's no hollow stems on this part, but way down below where I cut it back last year, there are hollow stems. So you can cut back your plants and actually create habitat for the little ground nesting bees, the little bees that do need hollow stems. Now this down here doesn't look like much, but this used to be my echinacea, or my purple coneflower patch. Now I cut this back after it was done flowering, and a lot of people do choose to leave it up because it provides food for the birds. But from what I found is leaving it up brings a lot more work to me, because for some reason the coneflower really, really loves my area, and it reseeds itself wildly. Over here, these are little purple coneflower seedlings. We've got them all over the place, even though I cut it back. We've got some over here, some over there. We've got more over here. And I've got to be cognizant of my tolerances. We're going to talk about tolerances and how they relate to garden cleanup in a little bit. But purple coneflower is one thing that I know that I cannot tolerate leaving up because it spreads too much. There are other things that I do leave up for birds to eat, and we'll show you those. And I will talk a little bit about what I have seen in my gardens, even though I do clean up. But purple coneflower is one of the things that I clean up because of my own tolerances. Now this is a plant right here that I will not be cutting back over the winter, and it's specifically to allow it to reseed. You can see a spent seed head right here. I think there's some actual seeds down in there. And I don't mind if this one spreads all over the place because it doesn't spread as much as the purple coneflower, and it seems to keep in its own area. So I absolutely love, this is a Sundancer daisy. I absolutely love them, and I don't mind them spreading. So this is one that I will leave up, and it seems like the wildlife do enjoy eating these seeds. This is a native flower to the state of Utah, and I don't see any evidence of it becoming invasive, so I do leave the seed heads on that. Sedum is another one that a lot of people leave upright over the winter, but I've found that here in Utah, what happens to this is it looks good for the fall months, and then once the winter snows hit, it flattens it to the ground, and then the next year it's a mess to try and clean up. So I leave sedum up as long as I can, but I do remove it before the winter snows. Grasses like this have seeds that the wildlife enjoy, and I leave it up all winter. It doesn't get smashed flat to the ground. When the snows do flatten it, it pops right back up. This is the Mexican feathergrass. So this is one that I do enjoy over the winter, and I cut this back in the spring. The mums that were once so beautiful absolutely are going to get cut back. These get cut back because they do flatten to the ground and they're in the snows, and they are so large that it is just a real pain to clean them up later. Matter of fact, once these stems start hardening over the winter, once the plants die back and the stems start hardening, it is more and more difficult to cut them back. So for ease of cleanup and for the looks of my yard, I do clean up the mums. They will be cut to the ground. All my little annuals are going to be pulled and composted. And I definitely cut back the catmint. Catmint reseeds itself wildly. So that gets cut back and actually thrown out so I don't cause myself more work next year. This switchgrass, which is so beautiful right now, I think it's a rosselbrush. It's panicum or switchgrass. It gets cut back this time of year because it is another one that gets flattened to the ground and is really hard to cut back in the spring if you leave it over the winter. Now these are my compost piles. This was almost completely full last year. And we're going to do another video on compost here in a little bit. But these compost piles will be cleaned out. The compost will be used in the garden beds, and we're going to be building our compost piles for next year. Now, I truly believe that compost piles like this also provides habitat for insects. So I do have a habitat for insects in the compost. I also have this wild hillside that does not get cleaned out at all, that also provides habitat for insects. One of the areas in my garden that I'm very, very careful about cleaning out are my garden beds. And that's because I want to eliminate habitat for pests. And I do try to leave out flowers that are beneficial for pollinators as long as absolutely possible. This little borage right here was great until the 20-degree temperatures hit it. Now it's past its usefulness and it'll be pulled out. So when it comes to cleaning out my gardens and when it comes to pest control, I try to follow IPM principles. Now, IPM is Integrated Pest Management, and it's a scientific way of looking at your landscape and deciding when and how to control pests. That could be disease, insects, weeds, anything that can cause harm in your garden. So to me, the first steps in IPM is to look at your landscape and understand exactly what is going on. Look at your landscape, look for damage, look for diseases, look for insects, and then understand those diseases, understand those insects. Do a little bit of research on them. Find out what they are, how they reproduce. Are they causing damage in your garden already? Or could they cause damage later on if their numbers get higher? And are they pests that actually can increase in number in your area? What can be a pest in one area may not be a pest in another. Then look at your personal needs, wants, and desires. What is important to you? How much damage can you tolerate? How much of that pest can you tolerate? And see if those pests have reached your tolerance limits. If they haven't reached your tolerance limits, then learn to sit back, not do anything, and watch and wait, unless it's something that you know can cause problems later on down the line. For example, grasshoppers. I think almost all of us know that grasshoppers can be a problem. But if you live in an area where grasshoppers normally aren't a problem and you see one or two and you know that they never really actually proliferate that much, there may be no reason to actually go out and start pest control for grasshoppers. Unless you live in an area like I do, where you know that they can become a huge problem and where you can have a lot of damage. Weeds. What is your tolerance for weeds? People's tolerance for weeds is all over the place. Look at that and see what your tolerance is before you start in on any control, and before you leave a weed, understand the consequences of leaving that weed. What are the consequences to you? Is that something that's going to choke out some of your more desirable plants? It's going to be almost impossible to get rid of because you create a seed bank? Look at your neighbors. I 100% believe that other people's opinions do matter. Their tolerances, their belief systems, their morals are important to them. So if I have a front yard that is full of dandelions, actually when I moved into this house a long, long time ago, my front yard was all grass and it was full of dandelions. And when I met my first neighbor, the first person I met, first thing that he did was come over and say, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you. What are you going to do with your dandelions?" And I thought, oh, how rude. The next person who talked to me about it was my own mother. She walked onto my property, looked at the dandelions and said, "What are you going to do about your dandelions?" At that point, I didn't care much about having dandelions on my property, but I knew that other people did care. So there are things that you can do. You may not have to get rid of all your dandelions, but you can appreciate your neighbor's point of view and take the seed heads off so you're not spreading them to your neighbors, because your opinion and your point of view and your morals and values are not more important than theirs. They're important to you, but theirs are important to them. So do things on your property that will keep your issues on your property and not spread to other properties. So I look at my property, I have a zero tolerance for weeds. So I've worked very, very hard on making sure that my property is weed free. Now I have worked in a manner where I don't use a lot of herbicides. I'm very happy to use 2,4-D if needed on a limited basis, and I'm also very happy to use Roundup on a limited basis. But I have so carefully managed my property that I've gotten to the point where I only use herbicides like Roundup and 2,4-D maybe once every couple of years on very small areas. Let me show you one of the areas that I used to use Roundup on a lot, but the city actually fixed that issue for me. Now I used to own a landscape maintenance company. I had a landscape maintenance company for high-end properties for 5 years. And during that time, one of my pet peeves was if my crews did not clean up the cracks in the sidewalks and the cracks between the asphalt and the sidewalks. Because weeds, when they get enmeshed in these areas, proliferate to other areas. They break up the asphalt, make more room for weeds, and it's just generally a problem. Now, trying to hand pull weeds out from between asphalt and concrete is a very difficult thing to do. Pulling weeds out of the cracks in your sidewalk is a very difficult thing to do. So these are areas where I would pull the larger weeds by hand, and then the weeds that I couldn't get to, I would use Roundup on. But the city fixed that because they came through and resurfaced the road, cleaned out all of the cracks, got all the weeds out, and resealed them. So at this point, there's only a few areas where I will be able to hand pull, and I'll be using Roundup less often. Now, another principle with integrated pest management is when you do have a pest problem, to use the very least harmful method first. Hand picking, cleaning things up, squishing the insects, hand removing insects, hand removing weeds, pulling out diseased plants. Those are the least harmful methods. If those methods don't work and you're still seeing proliferation, move up to the next step. Maybe there's some organic pesticides or organic methods that you could use to control those pests. And only when nothing else has worked and the pests are proliferating out of control or are causing harm, that's when you step up into the more harsh methods of control. But do it in a responsible manner by following the label and only using it when necessary and where necessary. Not blanket coverage, not just spraying it because you see a potential problem, but use it responsibly. So that's how I look at cleaning up my property in the fall, is I will go and remove what is going to be a problem for me specifically or a problem for my neighbors later on down the line, make it look clean and beautiful, and also be a way to control any bad pests that may come. So good insects love a garden that is left messy. They love to burrow in the leaves. They love to make their homes in the ground and in stems of plants. But the bad insects also love those type of areas. So I want to find that area in between where I'm taking care of the good insects and also removing the bad insects. Taking care of the good that's in my yard, but not leaving room for pests and disease to take hold. So this is my long rambling video on why I am going to be cleaning up my garden in the fall. Now, the next video is going to be the actual cleanup, so you can see what I clean up and what I leave. Beginning of the next video, we'll show you before picture and then show you the after, and then you can see what it looks like and see what is left. So I hope this video has not been too offensive to some and has been helpful to others. And if you have liked this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.